I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got an evening full of great information that's going to be shared, and kind of want to get right into it. But first we're going to do a little bit of our regular housekeeping things. So welcome everyone. My name is Elizabeth Drembus, and I'm the genealogist for the William and Mary Bray School Lab. In service to the Bray School Lab's mission to uncovering, documenting, preserving, and disseminating the history and the legacies of the Williamsburg Bray School, we host a monthly series on Zoom in order to share recent genealogical findings, engage the descendant community in this work to broaden our understanding of those legacies, and enlist the help of historians, genealogists, as well as the general public in furthering the conversations and the research surrounding the Williamsburg Bray School. The title of the monthly series is Bray School Stories, and this evening's focus is Freedom Seekers, History and Legacy of Black Loyalists. Once again, we're recording the session, and so it will be available later on the Bray School Lab's YouTube channel. To find it, simply Google Bray School Lab YouTube. If you prefer not to be recorded, please feel free to access this later from our YouTube channel. I'm joined this evening by Nicole Brown, who is a familiar face here at Bray School Stories, and two wonderful partners who I had the pleasure of meeting and getting to know through the University Studying Slavery Conference in Nova Scotia in 2023, Mr. Graham Nickerson and Andrea Davis. And I'm going to introduce them more fully in just a moment. As a reminder, our monthly sessions are designed to spark conversation, and I invite you to share your thoughts and your comments in the chat or by raising your hand. But first, some information to share about what's happening in the Bray School Lab, and also some upcoming events. So some of you may already have heard the news, but the William and Mary Bray School Lab is moving. We're going to be moving from the Colonial Williamsburg historic area in Barrett House that has been our home for the last almost 3 years. And we're moving to SWEM Library on campus as part of the university's library. And not only is this going to be a physical move, but this is also an organizational move as well. We're leaving the division of the Office of Strategic Cultural Partnerships, and Maureen and I and our students are going to now be housed under the University Libraries division. So that's where you'll be able to find us. We don't have a date yet for when we're going to be moving, but want to make sure that people know that that's coming probably in the next month or so. Some of you back in April during Descendants Week may have had the opportunity to hear Maureen Elgersman Lee give a lecture, and it was recorded by C-SPAN. Well, they have turned that lecture into kind of a classroom lesson plan, and they launched it last week, and it's now available on the C-SPAN website. And you can use this QR code to access the lecture. I've taken a small clip of just part of the sections that Maureen talked about during that lecture. She was really looking at the word scholar and broke that into several different ways of looking at it. And Maureen, I don't know whether you want to say anything about kind of what that lecture felt like, or the goals for what you had, how you kind of went to describe scholar.
Sure. Thank you, Elizabeth. That was really the culmination of looking at the historical records, the archival documents, looking at the moment, really examining the moment that we are living in, and really listening and leaning into comments and perspectives of descendant community members, whether they be in the Bray School book that we published collectively with Colonial Williamsburg Foundation as publisher last year, or just in conversations in descendant community meetings. So trying really to pull it all together, giving meaning to both the past and the present. So really excited that it's finally launched. We've waited a few months for that to happen. So encourage people to visit the C-SPAN, it's the Lectures in History series, but also I'm gonna also reference our blog, the Bray School Lab's blog, A Reasonable Progress, and Juanita Graham's beautiful post that she wrote, including the poem that she wrote in reaction to the C-SPAN talk. So I think it's speaking to the fact that we in the lab have been working with a set of documents and other things to generate original resources, and then the resources and things that we do are also inspiring others to. So this is really becoming a really multi-iterative process, and it's really exciting to see it unfold.
Exactly. Thanks, Maureen. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but all right. And then the last thing I wanted to bring to everybody's attention is our annual Slate seminar is coming up at the end of October. And for those of you who have attended Slate seminar before, you know it's a conference within a larger conference. And you can use the QR code there in the Slate seminar graphic to register. Because of some funding issues this year, we are charging a nominal fee. This is a little different than the past year, but it is going to be a $25 fee. But with that $25, you get 6 amazing sessions of Slate seminar material, presentations, panel discussions, and we're going to talk a little bit later this evening about how Bray School Stories is going on location at Slate seminar. But I encourage you to register. It's going to be Friday, October 24th and Saturday, October 25th. And I should say that in addition to the 6 sessions of Slate seminar, your registration also gets you into the 2 keynote addresses that are going on with that larger conference, that 2026 5-year conference series. So that's all the housekeeping stuff. And we're going to get to why we're all here this evening. I'm going to stop sharing. And I want to be able to introduce our wonderful speakers. Okay. I think that worked. Okay. So I'm going to introduce them in the order that they're going to be speaking, but I'm just going to introduce them each all right now. So first up is Graham Nickerson. Graham is a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Brunswick. He researches Black Loyalist agency in the Maritime Provinces, work that earned him the United Empire Loyalist Association's Research Scholarship. He serves on the boards of the New Brunswick Black History Society and the Black Loyalist Heritage Society, and has been recognized nationally for his leadership in social justice and heritage. After Graham speaks, we have Nicole Brown. Nicole is an award-winning author, living history expert, and a PhD candidate in American Studies at William and Mary. She also interprets at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Her ongoing academic research analyzes Black literacy in the Atlantic world via interdisciplinary and descendant-engaged scholarship. Brown's work as a museum professional has taken her across the globe, presenting on interpretive techniques for hard histories at museums and historic sites in the United States. Brown recently co-edited a book entitled The Williamsburg Bray School, 1760 to 1774, A History Through Records, Reflections, and Rediscovery. Welcome, Nicole. And last but certainly not least, Miss Andrea Davis. Andrea Davis is a community builder, a natural leader, a strong communicator, and powerful champion for those who need to have their voices heard. She is a Nova Scotian born of Black Loyalist descent, with ancestral ties and relationships within the communities of Birchtown, Shelburne, and Black communities throughout Nova Scotia. Andrea understands the Black Loyalist Heritage Society is committed to discover, interpret, promote, and safeguard the history of Black Loyalists and their descendants, and to the advancement of universal recognition of Black Loyalists as a nascent Canadian heritage community. Her greatest source of inspiration is from her 3 wonderful children and handsome grandson, and Andrea is a descendant of the entries of the Book of Negroes. Welcome, all 3 of you. I am so pleased that you're here, and I thank you so much for being a part of this, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
It's me first, right?
That's right.
Okay, I think, is it still possible for me to share my screen or?
Sure. Let me go ahead and make you a co-host so we can do that.
Okay, And I'm not sure how long you wanted me to go for, but
And 10, 12 minutes? Is that
okay.
what we
Okay,
talked
yeah,
about,
sure.
Nicole?
Yep.
Okay, good.
So my name is Graham Nickerson, as you already know. And my basically um, my research in Black Loyalist history and agency is born out of being a descendant and seeing the history portrayed in a way that doesn't reflect the community that I grew up in. And my history not being reflected in like movies like The Patriot, for instance, which is I'm sure everybody can pick historical inaccuracies out of that movie, but when it's like your entire people are erased from the story, then you know you're left with a big void of like, who am I and how do I fit into this? And so that is sort of like the layman's approach to getting into the history, but then really starting to do a critical analysis and see like there's so much nuance and and diversity within the Black Loyalist community that doesn't get reflected in the scholarship. I mean, with the Bray School records, that's a whole other element of Black Loyalist culture that no one has looked at until recently. So I am whenever I see share is active, so I will try and share the right screen. Okay, there we go. Can everyone see that okay? Yes? Okay. So this is sort of my stump presentation, and just it's kind of keeps abreast of my research and where I am at any given time. And like I say, it's really, I mean, my contribution is really my enthusiasm and sort of like boosting all the other great minds around me to say like, hey, this is like, there's more here and we should be looking. And people are starting to look at things again, open drawers and like, oh, look, there's a map we haven't looked at in 50 years. And so all of these things are cultural heritage and they all have meaning. And it means we can step back and reassess the history we thought we knew. And now with the 250 around the corner, other communities are also doing the same thing and tying our Black Loyalists back into the US, into places and connecting us with, are not really that distant relatives. So I will try and skip this slide ahead. Okay, so I'm going to skip the breakdown because I'm probably going to whip through this really quickly. But essentially where we're trying to get to is to move away from the idea of triangular trade and just that one grand sweeping narrative. Within the Black Loyalist community, we know from the records within the Atlantic provinces, for instance, that Black people were moving around in the intercolonial trade as well. And probably it was far more significant, the connections between Nova Scotia and the Caribbean, than Nova Scotia and Africa or Nova Scotia and the home country in Europe. So it's really the work that I do is focused on labor and stepping back from. So we had like the free and enslaved binary, and then with the work of Monty Whitfield, it sort of brought in the element of unfreedom, and so where someone is really on some scale of being in a coercive relationship to labor. And so I've stepped back a little bit even further to say, why don't we don't really care about what the state of the person who's doing the labor is. They represent labor. And so much of this, what you'll see or not, is basically a reflection of how the significance of Black labor was in early Loyalist Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So we can really start to look at the economy of Nova Scotia and specifically Shelburne in Nova Scotia and then St. John in what becomes New Brunswick. And when we start to actually look and break it down a little bit, a little more, we can see a construction boom, which is the early stages of Loyalist settlement, which emphasizes a certain set of skills. Then the Loyalists realize in Nova Scotia that they're not going to have an agricultural fiefdom because the soil's no good and the climate's not conducive to that in Nova Scotia. In New Brunswick, it is. And so you see a different style of loyalism evolve in New Brunswick, which is quite mute. It's really interesting that Nova Scotia gets all of the like attention because New Brunswick is the Loyalist province, not Nova Scotia. And the entire, if you come here and you look, you will see like it is probably far more similar to the middle colonies and the Northeast in terms of labor and the relationship between Loyalists and Black Loyalists. And I just want to, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I generate a lot of AI images, and I told this one to have Benjamin Marston in there and make him grumpy, and that's him over there. If you guys know who Benjamin Marston is. So when we're looking, so this is some early analysis of Black labor over the space of early Loyalist settlement. And so what this is showing is the dots are sized on the amount of available Black labor, and it goes through a timeline. And so it's an early work, and there are lots of issues that I'm not going to talk about. And if you think it's great, then we don't need to worry about it. But it is illustrative if you look at the time, as you watch the time go by, what is happening. And it makes a big difference because this is not how we see the evolution of Loyalist society in the Maritimes. All right. So as this goes through, you see the migration of labor. And if you knew the Maritime region well, you'll see like what's happening is a concentration of Black labor in the St. John River Valley, which isn't any surprise if you drive up the St. John River Valley. It's probably the largest area of arable land in the Maritimes. And they concentrated all the Loyalist elite, all the military elite. They all end up in well, not all of them, but most of them end up in New Brunswick. And then there's a satellite in like Windsor and the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, which is really in the orbit of New Brunswick and some tension with Halifax because of the government.
Yeah.
So this is a noisy network analysis. And so there's a issue with the platform that I use where all of the people who don't have locations yet occur at 00 on the map, and I couldn't get the lines to disappear. But what it does show is like the centrality of St. John. This is that blob here as a central meeting place. And the other surprise, not surprise, is the centrality of Sackville, New Brunswick as a Loyalist hub. And you'd be like, Sackville, like that's, if you know Nova Scotia, Sackville is like up in the middle of nowhere. But if you go to Sackville, you see all of these institutions that are funded by old white Loyalist money. And some of that money is generated through the sale of enslaved Black people. It was a hub for Loyalist slave traders. So that's kind of interesting. And it'll be interesting as I continue to add data to see where these sort of hotspots continue to pop up from. Then, so this is a runaway slave ad from St. John, New Brunswick, and it's essentially just showing the relationship between the 55, if people know who the 55 are. They're essentially 55 Loyalist elites who decide that they should run all of the new grants in Eastern British North America, which basically ends up leading to and so history here is more interesting than people sometimes give it credit for. These 55 overturn an election, basically pull a coup and take over the government and run the province for the next until the mid 19th century. And with that is this tension over what is going to happen with enslavement. So we have battles in these colonies over the issue of slavery that drag on until general emancipation. And I would argue even after, because people just go from property-based enslavement to economic servitude, where they're bound through contract labor. And then we have the so we have like indigenous Black people, we have mulattoes, quadroons, octoroons. There's this huge racial disparity between the various shades and hues of Black Loyalists, which we don't really understand what role your basically caste has on your social mobility. What we've seemed to have done is project this idea of Blackness back into the past, made it in our mental image, made everyone very, very dark, when in reality, people are not. They're not everyone is. And we don't know, like people like Stephen Bluke, who is probably mixed race, and he has a fairly prominent place in Loyalist society. And so trying to tease out, what does this mean? And so that's only something that's just really in its infancy. And then it's basically, in terms of Shelburne, is really trying to pick away at the Loyalist myth that has the town has sort of painted for itself as, like, I guess, gallantly retreating in defeat from New York City and gloriously building a refugee camp on the shores of Shelburne Harbor. And once we kind of crack that nut, it'll open the door for a lot more nuanced discussions and actually how society evolved and worked. And then looking at, so I will go through this video. It's basically how Benjamin Marston, it's a timeline of Benjamin Marston going around and surveying out the blocks of property in Shelburne after the Loyalists arrived there. And I'll show you the significance once it gets done. If this were bigger, for some reason, this is really, really small on the screen right now, but this is basically a timeline of Benjamin Marston complaining about everything. And so these colored blocks it's a color scale heat map of Black labor as surveyed into the Shelburne plan. And what is significant is this area here, where you see these very large lots that have lots of available Black labor. Well, this area right here is now called Loyalist Corner. And in and around that corner, there were 30 Black servants and enslaved people just in that one little area. And so when we start to think about things like the 1785 municipal broadside that prohibits Black people from congregating, it means something completely different when you've got hundreds of Black people surrounding you in your neighborhood than one or two. And it turns from being like an exercise in coercive white power to perhaps white fear of large numbers of Black people in their midst and trying to like regain control. Again, this is just the beginning. So we have to look and see what, this is a very early data set of what this town looks like. And so it's going to be, until my dissertation is over, mapping out how labor is situated and evolves. And yeah, so we'll just skip through there. And here it's again just talking about labor and the significance of Black skilled trades and the predominance of them. And having discussed this with Nicole, realizing just how targeted the British were, and sometimes when they were attracting Black Loyalists from the source locations in Virginia and in South Carolina to draw away skilled maritime labor. And again, the gendered roles of Black Loyalist women and just how much labor depended on them and how intensive it was. And so this is Stephen Shakespeare's house, which is on Loyalist Corner. So Stephen Shakespeare had 16 either bound or enslaved Black people with him when he arrived. So just as a case in point, his house is the first house that gets built in Shelburne, first Loyalist house that gets built in Shelburne. It gets done because it has all this labor available. Having that labor available and the house constructed then means that all of the meetings and the Loyalist elites are meeting at Stephen Shakespeare's house, which puts him in a predominant position, and he eventually ends up owning large tracts of land in and around Shelburne. And so again, we have to reassess just the important role that labor has in social mobility, both for white loyalists and for Black loyalists too. And so the other piece of the puzzle here is my research for my MA. If those people who are aware of like the Loyalist migration to Port Mattoon was one of the Loyalist landings. Well, we know from some records in New Brunswick that about 300 Black Loyalists don't actually make it to Port Mattoon. They end up in close to St. Stephen in southern New Brunswick, or close to Cowles, Maine. And so these are the militarized Black units. And almost every person on the rolls in this unit have a skilled trade, or an unskilled trade, if you want to view it that way. And so they are the people who arrive in the summer of 1784, shortly before the riots break out. And so I would argue that instead of looking at the Shelburne riots as Black people simply undermining prices, it is an influx of skilled Black labor that outcompetes. These guys are basically stevedores and coopers, and all of these people are skilled towards the maritime trades. Whereas these furloughed soldiers, they're farmers and candlestick makers and cobblers, and they can't compete because these guys already have their social connections to white power, and they're organized amongst themselves into work parties already. All right, there we go. And so, yeah, so this is the law that gets passed in 1785, outlawing Negro dances and frolics. And again, if we think about the concentrated numbers of Black people on the Shelburne waterfront, it changes the meaning of why you would not want people congregating. And it makes a lot more sense because if you know Shelburne and you know where Black people live now, they're like, even now it's a place upon itself that most white people don't, they're not walking back there to see like, are Black people congregating back here? It just is, it's a different community, and it would be outside of white surveillance most of the time. And again, this is just looking at, so there is a real attempt to sanitize a lot of Loyalist history in terms of owning or being enslavers. And so we run in, like, this is just a proof of ownership for one of the enslaved Black people. This is Henry Jones, but there are a number of them. And this doesn't tend to make it into sort of the public history. And then there is, again, going back to the question of, what did Black Loyalists look like? What was their racial composition? And so a few years ago, when I first put the slide together, I tried to I gave it a prompt to tell it like, hey, show a Black Loyalist company of soldiers, but make sure that some of them are indigenous and multiracial. And it just came up with these crazy Cyclops people. And so but I think it does represent sort of like how our understanding of race and the Black Loyalists actually exist. And if you were to hang around in Shelburne for very long, you would see this very, very broad complexion. We have, like, my family has a propensity for red hair. So I have lots of cousins who have red hair, and I can guarantee at somewhere in back in time, there is a Scotsman or an Irishman going with all of these red-haired kids running around. So there is that whole issue of race and when people are coming together and what is the offspring and what is the consequences of having these different people. What does the product of an interracial couple, what does that do for mobility? Like sometimes we know that it doesn't do anything and you just have a light-skinned poor person, but other times here in New Brunswick, we see instances of Black people being raised up by their white fathers and given some opportunity. So anyway, this is shameless plug for the Loyalist Connections podcast, which I feature on a couple of them. It's a very good discussion on Loyalist communities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick to give you a bit more detail on some of the through lines and problems and questions we're still asking. So thank you very much. And I don't know when we're doing questions, but if at the end or whatever, I hope I've given people something to think about.
Graham, thank you so much. And there are questions, but I think I want to make sure that Nicole and Andrea both get a chance to give their presentations. So I see the questions in the chat. I'm going to hold on to them until the end, if that's okay with everyone. And I want to make sure that we go ahead now to Nicole. So if Graham, if you can go ahead and stop sharing your
sharing, I will try.
And then Nicole, it's over to you.
Yeah, so I will start by saying I'm immensely honored not only to be in this space, as I always am, with all of you, but I'm incredibly honored to work with Graham and Andrea in different capacities. I've had the incredible privilege to go to Nova Scotia 3 times in the last 3 years, once a year. And every time I am there, I learn something new that fundamentally changes the way I'm writing about the Birchtown Bray School, which is going to be a part of my dissertation. But Graham and Andrea, in different ways, gently remind me to challenge my assumptions of what I think Black education looks like, both on a communal landscape as well as a historic landscape. So thank you both for that. I'm honestly just excited to be invited to the party. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Bray Associates in Nova Scotia. Now, full disclosure, they have very long history that extends well beyond the 18th century and even the mid-19th century. But for the purposes of our conversation, I'm going to limit our conversation to really about the 1830s, specifically 1835. And what I want to do, and Graham and I have talked about this, and Andrea and I have talked about this, is talk a little bit initially about the connections between Virginia and Nova Scotia. There are no connections between the Bray Associates in Virginia and the Bray Associates in Nova Scotia, in the sense that the Williamsburg Bray School did not automatically transfer to becoming a Nova Scotia Bray School. But there are synergies and connections between Black Loyalists in Virginia, Black families in Virginia, and not only Black families and Black communities in Nova Scotia, but Bray schools that would be founded post-American Revolution. So I know we talked about this last month, but I wanted to reiterate that one of the clearest ways to see the interconnectivity between Black Loyalists, and by Black Loyalist, I mean, I want to make sure I'm defining that clearly for everyone here. It is someone who is of African descent, who chose to align with the British, specifically during the American Revolution, in an attempt to not only self-liberate, but attain their freedom after the American Revolution. So Black Loyalists in Virginia and their emigration to Nova Scotia. As I said, one of the clearest ways to sort of define or see that is through the Book of Negroes. The Book of Negroes is a colloquial name for what Guy Carleton, who is a British officer, and his fellow officers do while they are in New York in 1783, which is record thousands of names of Black refugees from what we consider to be the modern day United States. Of the 3,000 Black refugees refugees who self-liberate and end up in New York, 855 of those names are from individuals who hail from Virginia. And I'll talk about that in just a second. We do know that there are 17 unique individuals specifically recorded as self-liberated from Williamsburg, Virginia. And I've been looking at those individuals quite closely, members who were enslaved by the Holt family, by the Prentice family. Interestingly, quite a few very young girls, and by very young, I mean between the ages of 10 and 14, who make it to the end of the war and then end up in New York. But a couple of those individuals also include people like Sally Dennis, who was 20 years old and had a 19-month-old son named John, who was, quote, born behind enemy lines. A large number of children who will move to Nova Scotia, and more particularly Digby and Birchtown, Nova Scotia, will be born behind enemy lines, what the Americans define as enemy lines, specifically to Black mothers from Virginia. You also see people like Peter Prentice, who was 32 years old when he's recorded in the Book of Negroes, and he's part of the engineer department. And individuals also like Jupiter King, whose enslaver by the name of Mr. King had a particularly prolific history in Norfolk in particular. When you're actually looking, though, at identifying all of these Black Virginians who move to Nova Scotia, who self-liberate, end up in the Book of Negroes, and then go to places across Nova Scotia, not just Birchtown, but as Graham was mentioning, there's a wide swath of different places that Black Virginians who self-liberate go in Nova Scotia. What you will see is a very particular trend. So the yellow star that you see on this map, and this is the Jefferson Fry map, which was published in 1755, that's Williamsburg. So that's for anyone who's joining this conversation who is living in Williamsburg, residing in and around Williamsburg, that's where we are. But the largest number of individuals who self-liberate, who are recorded in the Book of Negroes, come from what is known as Norfolk and Craney Island. And Craney Island is currently a naval base for the United States Navy. And that's what those two green stars reflect. So what you see is 53% of Afro-Virginians, and Afro-Virginians is a term I use to describe those of African descent who hail from Virginia, who then go to Nova Scotia, are from maritime communities. And this picks up on something Graham and I have talked about, which is over half of the Virginian Black Loyalists come from not just communities that are connected to specific types of trades, cooperage, for example, carting work, but they're connected to waterway communities. And then interestingly enough, over a third of the Afro-Virginians who are recorded in the Book of Negroes come from urban environments, specifically Norfolk and Williamsburg and Yorktown are the highest concentration, followed by Richmond to be the next highest concentration. So that's really important to keep in mind when we're talking about the types of people who are moving into Nova Scotia after the American Revolution. You also see a very large cadre of people from what we would now consider Southside Virginia or from the Eastern Shore in Virginia. One of those individuals is named Moses Wilkinson. He's enslaved in Nansemond, Virginia. He unfortunately contracts smallpox and becomes what is described in the 18th century as lame and blind, but he is a Methodist minister who has a prolific history in Birchtown in particular. And you also have individuals like David George. Now, I will say this is new research, and it's something I'm working on in my dissertation. David George and his oral history, which is recorded when he goes to London to petition to be part of the group of Black Loyalists from Nova Scotia that eventually go to Sierra Leone, he is listed as being born in Essex County. But if you look at all the other information in that oral history, he's actually from Sussex County. And so the triangulation of his history still needs to be studied more extensively. But ultimately, he is from Southside Virginia, specifically Sussex County, just prior to Southampton and Sussex being split into two different counties in the 1750s. So major religious leaders like David George, like Moses Wilkinson, who eventually also go to Sierra Leone, hail from Virginia specifically. And that is really important when you can talk talk about not only the religious tenor and the religious overtones of places like Birchtown, but where their religious leadership is coming from, which is in the case of Moses Wilkinson and David George from Virginia. You also see connections to Virginia beyond the American Revolution, people like William Barrett and his daughter Rachel Barrett. William Barrett self-liberated during the War of 1812. He was enslaved in Richmond. I'm still working with Lisa Bowers, who has done an incredible amount of work on this particular sampler that was done by William Barrett's daughter Rachel Barrett when she was 12 years old. He was not only enslaved in Richmond, but specifically was working in an observatory that was privately owned in Richmond. Still trying to learn more about who he was enslaved by, because his testimony that is published in the 1880s does not, and I think it's very intentional on the part of Mr. Barrett, does not mention the name of his enslaver. But he becomes a deacon of the African Baptist Church in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So you see a lot of these Black male leaders in specific denominations, the Methodists and the Baptists in particular, hailing from Virginia. And I think that's important to note. So really quick overview on different Bray schools. Again, this is something I'm going to be writing about in my doctoral dissertation. I've talked about it with Andrea, I've talked about it with Graham, but there are several different locations that the Bray Associates choose to establish schools post-American Revolution, most of which, until the beginning of the 1830s, are run by Black Loyalists. One of them is the Birchtown Bray School. So Stephen Bluke, who Graham mentioned, born in Barbados to a white father and a Black mother, he's sort of an interesting figure in that he literally disappears in 1796, and is a bit of a problematic figure in some ways, in the sense that his second marriage is to his adopted daughter, but he does have an incredibly prolific history at the Birchtown Bray School. The first student list, which is the one I've listed here, mentions 44 different students. Over 60% of the students are girls, Black girls, and just under 40% of the students are Black boys, teaching spelling, reading, the Psalter, the New Testament, the Bible. In particular, they're mentioned. But there are 9 student lists that exist from this school that I'm still analyzing. The Brindleytown Bray School was located in Digby, which is near that Annapolis River Valley that Graham mentioned. There are 10 student lists, including lists recorded by Joseph Leonard, who's a Black Loyalist, and his daughter, who actually taught sewing specifically at the school. And you can see in the excerpt of this student list that I've pointed out, sewing under the care of Leonard's daughter is specifically mentioned. So in this case, a very young Black girl who is actually serving as a teacher. And there are extant student records as well as correspondence between 1785 and 1833. Then you have the Halifax Bray School. You have Black Loyalists like Limerick Isaac, who is also known as Isa Limerick and Isaac Limerick. This is one of the student lists that he records, actually, so this is his handwriting. Between 1784 and 1836. Eventually, the school will be taken over by a white loyalist named Deborah Clark. But ultimately, there's quite a bit of information on these students as well. So again, still going through all of these student lists. And then you have the Preston and the Fredericton Bray Schools. So the Preston Bray School, there are no student lists that have survived, but we know that a Black woman by the name of Catherine Abernathy was teaching at this school before she emigrates to Sierra Leone. And quite a bit of information on her in the minute meetings of the Bray Associates. And then actually George Pigeon, who is a white minister in Fredericton, it's kind of on the northernmost part of Nova Scotia. The Bray Associates write to him requesting the formation of a Bray school, and he actually responds and says, essentially, no thank you, we don't need one, which is very similar to what happens in Norfolk, Virginia and Yorktown, Virginia, just actually less than 50 years prior. So ultimately, there is so much information that still has to be analyzed about all of these schools. But to give you a sense in real time of the legacy of the school, which I hope will transition into what Andrea wants to talk about, this is a photograph I took in August when I went to go visit the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre to continue collaboration with Andrea and Graham. And the landscape has effectively remained mostly unchanged. You might even recognize that large boulder on the right side from the first slide that Graham shared with you. This is as close of an image as I can give you as to actually what the students at that Birchtown Bray School would have seen when they walked to their school, which likely existed out of the home of Stephen Bluke. And I think it's worth noting that on that first student list from 1790 that Stephen Bluke records, 40% of the students who went to that school were from families that came from Virginia. 40% of those students, if you cross-reference it with the muster lists from the Black Loyalists in 1784 and the Book of Negroes from 1783. And what that means is that there is a community that has come from Virginia that is already beginning to reshape the landscape of Nova Scotia, and specifically spaces like the Birchtown Bray School. So with that, I will pass it off to Andrea, and thank you all just so much for your time.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it so much. Andrea, let me get my screen ready so we can have slides. There we go.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I had to get help just because technically I'm not that strong. So I'm glad Elizabeth helped me get these slides to you. They're not as powerful and strong as the first two, but again, this is not a competition. This is about sharing stories, sharing history, and having a fantastic conversation. And again, like Nicole mentioned, it's been my pleasure to know you, Nicole, and your enthusiasm, your passion, your joy, your joviality, everything that you bring to the center when you come to see us. You really do heighten up the staff and the community and the board members. And myself as well. So for that, I appreciate it. And of course, Graham and I go way back. I'm not sure if we need to mention our relationship, but we do. He's laughing, and when I was listening to Graham talk about skin tone, and I look at my skin tone, being a darker skinned person, and I always like to believe that this is what the Black Loyalists, some of them would have looked like, at least my ancestors. And the dark skin is something that you don't see a lot of in the small town that I live in right now, that I was born in. So at one time, the color of my skin would have, made me leave my community because of the darkness of the skin. But I came back, and I came back after 32 years of being away, after have, been born in Shelburne and then graduated out and then moved on, and learning some things from Graham, such as the fact that we share the same great-great-grandfather. I have to mention that, Graham. I mean, if you take a look around, there's a lot of us that come from this one man, I'm going to say this, in the community that's, had quite a few relationships with some other people in the community. And that kind of also what makes us who we are today as well, in terms of our skin tone and who we are. But my name is Andrea Davis. I am the executive director of the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. I am also an 8th generation descendant of the Black Loyalists. I have 2 entries from the Book of Negroes. One is Jupiter Farmer, and the other one is Titus Milliner. And so those are the 2 entries that I knew nothing about growing up in Shelburne, having moved away, and then come back and go, wow, all of this new information about myself and about who my family, are and were, and who my ancestors are and were. So for me, that is just, it's quite, I'm still getting used to it. And I'm still trying to kind of understand where I fit into this huge story of the Black Loyalists in Nova Scotia. So I'm going to get you to go to the next slide for me. I would just like to let you know that the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre is in Mi'kmaq, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The treaty is covered by peace and friendship in this particular territory. But today and every day, we acknowledge the history, contributions, and legacies of African Nova Scotian people and communities who have been here for over 400 years. So with that being said, who are we? Who are the Black Loyalists? And who is the center? Who is the Black Loyalist Heritage Society? So as you can see here, the center is it's actually a world-class historical destination. The building itself is a, oh God, don't even know how big it is, but it's quite huge. I know it's worth a lot of money, and it actually came out of an arson that took place back in 2006 at an older site or an older building on site that housed all of the artifacts and information. And in 2006, when that arson took place, we lost over 20 years of artifacts, documents, papers, and everything out of a small office building that we had on site. So this year actually marks the 10th year anniversary of the opening of the center that you see in the background there as a result of that fire from 2006 with the rebuilding and with the donations and the contributions that were made by the community. So we proudly have been doing all kinds of events, special plans. We've been holding gatherings, conferences, all kinds of just interesting things that have come to us as the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre. So I'm going to get you to move on. Hope these are in good order. So now I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about the society. But first of all, I want you all to know that the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre and the society is known as Canada's best kept secret. So it's been kept a secret for a long time. And I'm here, you know, to get the cat out of the bag, as they say, and to tell you about us, who we are, what we represent, and what this means to this community and the world. We are not a place as a museum where artifacts come to die. We're actually a place that educates. We provide safety, story, opportunity. We provide shelter, love, pain, joy, sacrifice. And they also offer me, I'm there as well as other descendants of the Black Loyalists. So it's not just this place in history that you would think you'd need to go and artifacts are just sitting there. It actually has a vibrancy about it that we're quite proud of. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what we've been up to as we navigate throughout the slides. So yeah, you can move on. That's good. So we are located, I'm going to take a drink for a moment. We are located about 7 kilometers outside of the town of Shelburne. And I think that is strategic, of course, because I feel like the history in Shelburne, especially the Black history, and Graham can talk to you a lot about this. I mean, there's just things that it just still feels like there's this air of colonization that continues to be vibrant in this community. And this whole thing about where we're located doesn't mean that we're not part of the fabric or the story or the mosaic of Canadian history, just because we're outside of the town in which we landed in 1783. Shelburne was the largest landing port for Black Loyalists in Nova Scotia at that time. Other ports include Port Mattoon. And by the way, my ancestor, Jupiter Farmer, was actually in Port Mattoon, and he came aboard the ship Diana to Port Mattoon. And of course, historically, there was a fire that took place in Port Mattoon, and a lot of the people did get uprooted and they moved along. But we, on our site at the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre, we have a ship that is a whirligig. And in case you don't know what a whirligig is, you can look it up. But a whirligig is, it's kind of like it's made out of wood, and it's a crafted, it could be a lobster, it could be a ship, it could be a person. And when the wind blows, the sails start to move or the arms start to move. So we have a whirligig that was built specifically for us with the name Diana, which Jupiter Farmer, Generation 1 to me, would have landed in Port Mattoon. Okay, so we go to the next slide. Here's just a little bit of a timeline that I put together really quickly that kind of outlines a bit of the history that we talk about at the center, at the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre. And just to let you know, in the background of that beautiful picture is it's a picturesque, I guess, photo of downtown or Dock Street in Shelburne. And one thing that is not always spoken about is that we were there too. And it's so picturesque and beautiful. As you can see it now, including the building with the steeple in the back would have been the old, I think, Cox's shipbuilding as well. So Shelburne does hold a lot of significance historically. And we're still trying to almost become accepted into that story. And it's quite sad that when you think about just how beautiful Shelburne is, it offers a place for balance and work and life, and a great place to raise your family, and a great place to kind of live by the water. But the history of Shelburne is quite dark, and it's quite painful. And we're looking at ways in which to actually to change that. At least I am, as the next generation to the ancestors here. So as we know, I don't have to convince you of the American Revolution. I'm sure we all know about what happened there. 1783, the Black Loyalists arrived on the shores of Nova Scotia. And to this day, which I don't have a map in my PowerPoint, there are 52 distinct communities in Nova Scotia that we don't really talk about and we don't connect with. And so Shelburne and Birchtown are number 1 and 2 on that map. And if I need to, Elizabeth, I can have that sent to you, and you can share that with your viewers at some point if you'd like to do that. Within a year of the Black Loyalists arriving in Shelburne, the first race riots took place in Shelburne, Nova Scotia. And I'm going to give you a couple of historical references throughout this presentation. There's no quiz, there's no test on this afterward, but it's just a reminders of just how deep the history really is in terms of the Black Loyalists, is that they were not meant to survive, but they did. I'm here, Graham is here. We've got other members of the community that are still here. So I'm very proud of that fact, not knowing that I was a piece of that actual history. The first race riots took place in 1784. In regards to that, there were Black Loyalists who were accepting wages well below those of the white Loyalists. And so as a result of that, it caused, of course, an economic turmoil. And the white Loyalists were pushing the Black Loyalists to back to Birchtown. I'm sure there's a whole historical reference that Graham could, walk you through on that. And I don't want to get into his neck of the woods with that. But, in a nutshell, that's what's happened, is that lower wages. And also David George as well was doing some preaching there to both Black and white residents. And that did not go over very well with the white residents of Shelburne. And so as a result, the first race riots took place in North America, pushing the Black Loyalists to Birchtown. Within 10 years of arriving, the Black Loyalists actually were still suffering racism, lack of fulfillment of promises made by the British to fight for them during the American Revolution. And one Black Loyalist, can be quoted saying, I would rather die than to be left on this cold, dark land. So you can get that kind of understanding of just how powerful those words would have been to those that would have looked like me and trying to assimilate into a community that didn't, or vice versa. It just didn't seem, to work. And so the Exodus actually removed about 1/3 of the 3,000 Black Loyalists who did come to Nova Scotia after the American Revolution. And as a result of that as well, it likely would have shown some racial blending or mixing of the community as well at that time. Then there's other places such as the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. And then we opened, I told you a bit about the arson. And in 2015, the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre opened to the public. And then 2025, we're celebrating our 10th year of opening. Okay. So the hidden history or hidden story is, I've already kind of gone over this, with you. In 1783, Birchtown became the largest free Black settlement in North America, outside of the, Africa at that time. So there's quite a few people, if you think about it, 3,000 strong plus. And, when in 1792, when some of the Black Loyalists signed up in downtown Shelburne to get on these 15 ships from Halifax to navigate to Sierra Leone, it would have been traumatizing. And in my mind, when I have a moment to reflect, I think about those that left and those that stayed. And I often think that those that left, mostly Christians, likely thought, wow, land of opportunity, Freetown, Sierra Leone, Africa, let's go. And those that stayed were probably like, now we're not going to go, we're going to stay here. But probably later, maybe wondering what it would have been like had they have gone. And those that did go, I imagine, would have thought, I wish I had not have left. Because when they did get to Sierra Leone, the systems were not set up. And again, more failure, more disappointment, more trauma. And so the cycle continues and continues. I've already read to you a little bit about here. Although much of this history has been hidden, we do continue to share our story. We draw thousands and thousands of visitors to the area to learn significant history, and also how we can connect to the rest of Canada and to the world. Okay, next slide. So I just put an image up here, and I just wanted to, it actually tells you what it is. I was going to ask if anybody wanted to put in the chat what this actually is, but next time I'm gonna do this presentation, I'm gonna take the name off of it. So this is what we call a pit house. And so the Black Loyalists at one time would have lived into this type of shelter for anywhere of up to 10 years. And although the image is from behind, there is a front image as well with a door and a hole that is dug in the ground, where the Black Loyalists would have dug this hole into the ground and then put these pieces of wood or logs over top of that hole, and then packed the slits or the holes with moss in order for them to stay warm in the winter and probably cool in the summer. So that would have been the type of housing that the Black Loyalists would have lived in. They were too far away from Shelburne to actually carry lumber back to build traditional houses. So this would have been the type of home that they would have stayed on. We do have this replica, or are going to have a replica of this. The last one we had actually was destroyed last winter in a winter storm. We received money from the government to rebuild, and we're actually rebuilding it. And we're getting help from a Black Loyalist descendant who was a carpenter in the area, who will actually be helping us to tell this story to the next generation. So on the next slide, I'm almost done here. Here's just some of the things that we are doing. We're actually working on our 2025 strategic plan, and that is still in the works. And again, this is the society itself. I'm within operations as the ED, and I do have a staff of 4 full-time staff within our center. And the board is made up of approximately 15 members from the community and afar. So that is what makes us so good. And Graham, of course, and Nicole, are both part of that and helping us with this beautiful work that we do. So thank gosh for them, because if not, we wouldn't have been able to do all of this work. We are also working on what we call our genealogy project. We received money from the government again, grant funding, to work on our, what we like to call our Black Loyalist Family Research Center. And another word for that is our genealogy lab. We're trying to become the hub of Nova Scotia from 1783 to now, to bring others that are looking for their descendant or their family or someone that they would like to actually just connect with from another part of Nova Scotia. So we're doing that work. We're also working on a project that is a traveling exhibit, and that's called the African Nova Scotian Seafarer Project. And that's actually a story of our Black fishers in the communities and their descendants. And we're actually listening to those descendants so they can tell us the story of the Black men and likely women who were part of the fishing industry. And I hope to take this to the Nova Scotia community colleges, where they currently teach fishing as a course as part of their programming. We've been looking to repatriate the Book of Negroes, or the Sir Guy Carleton papers, from the museum, in Kew, England. That is kind of pending a little bit. It's on hold, just because there's a lot of work to repatriation. I've never done this myself, so I'm getting help from others that are helping. So totally happy with moving that forward now that we have new board members. The number 2 Construction Battalion War Memorial Project is on the go. We're actually going to be digging in the ground within the next week or so to build a war memorial that sits at the cenotaph in Shelburne alongside the other heroes. We will have our own war memorial, which lists the 15 names, 3 of my family members who were part of the number 2 Construction Battalion. So when that work gets done, Elizabeth, I don't mind sharing that with you so that you can kind of have some of that information. We also working on our Black Banner program, which actually has an installation of our war heroes that is part of Remembrance Day here in November. And they line Dock Street in downtown Shelburne, that beautiful picturesque place that I showed you in the previous slides. Our banners are going to be amongst the rest of those heroes from the war. And so we're so excited about that we're managed to get at least 8 of those men, their installations done this year. We have community awards. We have some things are repeated here. I'm just trying to be a little greedy, I guess. We also have grant applications that are happening constantly. We've gotten over maybe close to $200,000 in grant money to do the work that we do. Fundraising, we have our apple pie fundraising project on the go right now. So if you want to order an apple pie, let me know. I can ship it out frozen. It's $13 a pie or 2 for $25. And it's all done by our society, by our board members. Oral Stories Project, and Graham didn't speak much about that, but because of him, we're able to get and do some of these oral story projects through grant money that we received. So it's a big deal for us to, and of course, Nicole knows this as well, for us to get onto that. Nicole talked a little bit about understanding the land, the rock, the trees around us. At one time, this was known as a disadvantage, perhaps to some degree, but the land, the trees, the rocks, they all tell us something. So when you walk on the land here, where there's been several archaeological digs, you'll see formation of rock, and you'll see rock foundations and basements that we're forever uncovering in this community to show that we were here. And of course, there's another story about the last Black servant who we're still trying to find information about her grave and other grave sites as well in the community. Okay, I think I'm almost done. You can go to the next one. Just a couple of images. So that's an outside image of the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre. The inside is twice as beautiful. If you'd like to have a copy of our virtual tour, just reach out to me and I can make that happen for you so that you can get some information on what it looks like on the inside. Next slide. And of course, a call to action. I'm reaching out to all of you that are on this program with us tonight here to please support us, stand behind us, and help us get to where we need to be to continue to honor the legacy of the Black Loyalists, foster the understanding across generations and across the world, and create a world where their story continues to inspire, educate, and empower all people. Just a few more images, and I think one is what Nicole talked about, which would have been the old school. So that's what the old school looks like. If you'll see by the middle flag there, it's the British flag that's there. This is a historical building, so it's been deemed by the province of Nova Scotia as a historical building, and so we take great care in that as well. So when we do the work, we make sure it's done by someone that's certified to do the work. And I believe there's another slide of this is our St. Paul's Church as well, which is on site, which is part of our story. This was once an African Methodist Episcopal church. And so to this day, it sits here as Paul. It's not in action anymore. It was deconsecrated, I believe, in the early to late 90s. We use it now for, I think we use it for weddings and I guess recitals and bands and Christmas concerts, stuff like that. And the next slide is our Black burial ground, very sacred ground. The actual gates that you'll see there, the black wrought iron gates, came from New Brunswick Historical Society. They gifted those to us to place there as a connection to our history and to our story. Okay, and I think that might be it. And then the last one is just me. When I first started, I don't have the braids anymore, but this is a bit of our gift shop that we have. If you'd like to reach out, you can reach out to me at Andrea@blackloyalist.com or go on our website at blackloyalist.com. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. There are so many questions and comments in the chat, and I'm looking at the time, but if you're all still with us, we're just going to go through these and enjoy a little bit longer Bray School stories tonight. One of the first questions came from Pat Vale. She said, my Scottish family arrived in Prince Edward Island in 1803. To what extent did this labor situation also exist there? This was in reference to Graham's Graham's talk. And also she said, I've never seen such a prohibition before. And I think, Pat, was that in reference to the frolicking and the gathering that Graham mentioned? So Prince Edward Island, 1803, same labor situation.
Yeah, Prince Edward Island is a strange duck, really. So Prince Edward Island was the only province in Canada where slavery was actually legislated. So in the rest of Canada, slavery depended on property law. So the law didn't enforce enslavement in as much as it enforced ownership of chattel. So chattel slavery, makes people things, and those things are protected by property law. Prince Edward Island, so a lot of people from the rest of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick end up migrating to Prince Edward Island because Prince Edward Island legislates slavery to attract slave-owning loyalists to there. And if you look at Prince Edward Island history, it was designed to be an absentee landlord, basically tenant farmer sort of setup, but it fails. It's another failure. And so the labor situation doesn't develop the way that the other areas do, because the economy basically falls apart and then they rejig the land ownership. But there was a significant Black presence on the island, but it has in Prince Edward Island, the Black population has intermarried into the white general population. So it's almost impossible now to tell who is a Black Loyalist descendant and who is not. So, yeah, I would say, and that's a very long answer for probably a short question, but Prince Edward Island arises as an attempt to attract and buttress slavery. So if you look at one side, Prince Edward Island is there as being very pro-slavery, and on the other side is Nova Scotia, which is a much more strong planter society that is less entrenched in enslavement and moving much earlier than the other provinces to abolish slavery.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Thanks. Akindele Decker was one of our speakers in last month, and he's actually posted a question. Do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to go ahead and read it? I can go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth, and
Sure.
to everyone. I was just gonna stay mute. Thank you to everyone. I've learned so much. Yes, I think this question is to Graham. This is in regards to the 300 Black Loyalists that you mentioned who did not end up in Port Morton. And I was asking whether they are related to the Black Pioneers, specifically the group that Thomas Peters is associated with.
They are not. So there are the Black Pioneers, which are Thomas Peters, the group that he is in, and they are an actual regiment, company. There are other ad hoc pioneer companies that form basically whenever the British need to build a defensive position. They just pull together whoever is around and get them to work. So you do have random sort of engineers who exist, and there is an early company or segment of the Black Pioneers who are on station in Shelburne from the very beginning. But the ones that end up who are supposed to go to Port Mattoon are actually, it's the Black Brigade, which would be, if you're familiar with Colonel Titus Cornelius from New Jersey. It's his militia, Black Militia Band. It's the Wagon Master General's company and the Artillery Auxiliary. So they're the paramilitary branch of the Black Loyalists, who are, I guess, the equivalent of provincial regiments. And so the pioneers end up first in Digby, or first in Annapolis, then in Digby, and then most of them relocate to New Brunswick, and then end up, I think a significant number end up going to Sierra Leone. So it's the same kind of trajectory of like, it's an organized sort of I guess you could call it an elite unit. It's an early, all of these military units and the pioneers join early. So they're seasoned military men by the time they are in New York. And they're the Black Brigade and the Wagon Master General and the artillery are one of the last people to leave New York City. In fact, Graham Hodges credits them for nailing the British ensign over top of Fort George in New York and then greasing the pole. So Flag Day is basically in response to the Black Loyalists who sort of taunt their old enslavers on the way out of New York Harbor. And I choose to believe it because it reflects well on me, but remotely. So that's kind of how it all works.
Thank you. So Teddy, are you still there? I was going to ask your question, or you had a comment. I'll go ahead and read Teddy's comment while she's kind of away from her screen. She says, "Forgive my ignorance. I did not or was not aware that I didn't know that the Black Loyalists left being enslaved in the US to be enslaved by the British. Also, the indenture contracts, terms, and conditions. Can Graham expand on what he knows about that?"
Oh, I'm back. We go ahead.
You're back. Oh, I'm sorry, Teddy. Okay. Did you
No,
want
no,
to did you want to ask anything more about that?
Nope. Just tell me about that.
Okay.
Hi, Teddy. It's good to actually speak with you in person. I've met you a few times online.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so basically the British, when they offer freedom to the Black Loyalists, they're only targeting people who were enslaved to Patriot owners. So for the loyalists, white loyalists who had joined the British cause, their enslaved people remain enslaved even when they arrive in Nova Scotia. And then there is just this constant, and I think we don't understand. One of the things that I'm trying to do with looking at big data is to try and suss out how many Black Loyalists actually get re-enslaved, because there is evidence in the records to say that re-enslavement and kidnapping into the Caribbean is a constant problem from the very beginning. And entire communities disappear because they were basically, somebody rolls up in a schooner, kidnaps everyone and sails away, and they're lost to history. So then the profitability of slavery in the Northeast in Canada isn't great. Because we don't have plantations. I would argue that the St. John River Valley is more profitable because there is large tracts of land. But one of the things that shows up is in the 1830s, there is a book written about like the economy of Nova Scotia. And with all of the enslaved Black people now in their like 60s and 70s, his last name is Halliburton, and he writes that it's more economic to free your enslaved people because then you won't be obligated to take care of them in their old age. So and what he says is like, basically it's cheaper to have cheap free Black labor than it is to take care of enslaved Black people. So what transitions is bound like enslaved labor to like this kind of economic binding of labor. And in my family tree, we like my great great grandfather in the 1870s is bound to a white family in economic servitude. So
Yes.
it doesn't go away. Like it's just been kind of scrubbed from public public knowledge now, but once you get into the records, you see like these people they're economically incapable of sustaining themselves, and they have to enter into these agreements, and this lasts for quite a while.
Well, all I can say is, wow, you really opened up, but I'm gonna have to be doing some research. I mean, that was just so misunderstood on my part. I don't know about anybody else, but that was so
Canada
misunderstood.
they portray it as the land of freedom, and those of us who are black, like Black Loyalists, Black refugee descendants, are like, wait a minute, this is not. This is like a good PR job, but we had slavery here, and it was in places like PEI. It was violent as in the South.
Wow, thank you, Graham.
So David has put some comments in the chat, and I'm also looking at the time, but I'm going to go to actually a question that Yvonne Johnson raised. She said, has anyone taken any DNA tests to try to connect with Loyalist descendants in Virginia? Andrea, as part of the genealogy project, as part of the Family History Center, has that come up? Has that been part of it?
In terms of DNA, we're setting up a process in which that can be done. I mean, I did my own DNA through Ancestry, and my DNA took me to Irish descent as well as African descent. In this community, there is a lot that are of Irish descent as well. In terms of connecting to Virginia, there has been some communication that we've had with other like-minded groups or genealogy groups in the United States, and that work is still yet to be done, and it will be part of our Black family search project that we're doing. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of people to actually get this up and running, but it is a great question, and that is something that's on our radar.
All right, so I'm looking at the time, and David, was there anything you wanted to bring up from your comments in the next minute or so that you wanted to have addressed?
Hi. I really did. It was something that someone mentioned about people. I think it was Andrea talked about some people deciding to stay in Nova Scotia, but other people deciding to opt to migrate to Sierra Leone, and whether or not, they ever sort of wondered whether they'd made the right choice or not. And there was something I read a long time ago, and I'm maybe 40 or 50 years ago, a long time ago, by Gerald Mullins, called Flight and Rebellion, which was on Virginia. But he had this point that he made about the Americanization, or the acculturation of people from Africa to the New World, and over the generations, how their identity with Africa becomes kind of stretched thin. And I'm wondering if you look at the people that opt to go to Sierra Leone in the 1790s, are either themselves people who were enslaved from Africa, or they were people who were children of people who had been directly enslaved from Africa, or grandchildren, but had some more immediate connection to Africa as a place in the mind. Whereas the ones that said, no, I'm kind of a new world person here. I'm going to stay here in this new world because the new world is what's really familiar to me. I don't have any immediate memories or family shared stories about the ancestral homeland. Is there any way you think that could be tracked down through records?
I'll let Graham and Nicole maybe take this one, and especially if it's talking about documentation. Not sure, Graham, if you could kind of take this one.
I can take a crack if
Yeah.
Nicole.
Ditto.
Okay. So what it appears to be is there's a sort of conspicuous presence of religious people going back. So pretty much all of the religious leadership go back. And there's a story in one of the small archives in Nova Scotia, there's a book by Edmund Kroll, The History of Barrington Township, which I recommend taking a look at because it has some interesting, rare sort of information on Black Loyalists in that township. But what it says is that basically it's talking about some guy, I think John Coffin is his name, who's walking through the woods and meets a bunch of Black Loyalists headed to the ships. And they say to him when they're on their way to join the expedition to Africa that they're going to Africa to be made majesties of. So it seems to be a social and economic power move, really, to become colonial representatives in their own right back in Africa. So it doesn't seem to be cultural because of the just such a diversity of people who end up going. But again, I don't think there hasn't been a rigorous enough analysis of, all of the elements of these individuals to sort of help us understand a sort of systematic approach. But it seems as though there's a guy on the board named Nigel Davies, who is a fantastic academic as well. And he's written on Sierra Leonean society. And his interpretation is that the Scotians, or Nova Scotians as they called themselves when they arrived in Sierra Leone, and still do refer to themselves as that in Sierra Leone, is that they saw themselves as the rightful sort of upper class in Sierra Leonean society. So I think it's more about being cultural elites than it is about tying themselves back to Africa per se.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. We have a couple of wonderful people who are on the Zoom call today, Akindele and Chantel, who were part of Bray School Stories just last month. And I'd highly recommend, if you haven't listened to that Bray School Stories on the Bray School Lab YouTube channel, you do so. And I just saw Akindele, thank you, you're welcome. But it's also true. Akindele just made a great point that many Black Loyalists were actually born in America. I've also linked a great book that I highly recommend. It's something I've used in my scholarship called Becoming African in America. It was written by James Sidbury in 2007, and it looks at the idea that what happens through colonization is you have people from the African diaspora coming to the United States, or what we see today as the United States, and they're seeing themselves as disparate and different communities. Your Igbo, your any number of different African nations. It's not sort of one sort of monolith. And it's after the American Revolution, really through the 1790s to the 1830s, that this sort of back to Africa movement, both for white nationalists who want to push Black people out of the United States, becomes prevalent, but also this reclamation of African identity. And I will leave you sort of with this one last thought, which is that I think a really good example of the idea that people who are going to eventually to Sierra Leone may or may not necessarily have ties from direct memory to Africa, although it's obviously still present today, is through a young child named Mary Snowball. So Mary Snowball, her mother and her father, Violet and Nathaniel Snowball, are enslaved in Virginia. Most people enslaved in Virginia by the mid-18th century have been first, if not second, generation Virginians by this point in time. They're enslaved to two different people. Violet's enslaved in Princess Anne. Nathaniel is enslaved in Norfolk, and they self-liberate and end up with their children, Nathaniel, China, and Mary, at the very least, in New York City in 1783. Not all of them are actually recorded in the Book of Negroes. China doesn't appear in the Book of Negroes. She appears in the Muster Book from 1784. But I mention this because Mary Snowball is only 2 months old when she's born behind enemy lines. When she gets to Nova Scotia, she was 9 years old. She had never been to Africa. She actually probably did not remember Virginia because she was not born in Virginia. But she is eventually one of those young Black girls who will make her way to Sierra Leone, who was on that list of students at the Birchtown Bray School, and probably eventually taught needlework to other young Black African girls in Sierra Leone. So she's sort of a perfect example of there's not one way to sort of think about the interconnectivity between Sierra Leone, Nova Scotia, and Virginia. But I think your question is great for that very reason. Because gosh, I think now is the moment for us to continue exploring that connectivity. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. And thank you, Graham. And thank you, Andrea. I'm going to share my screen one last time because I do want to make sure that we all get a chance. I want to talk a little bit about what's going to be happening next month. For those of you who are still sticking with us, I appreciate you all being here. And let's see if I can do this. We're going to do from current slide, and we're going to go over here. So I mentioned earlier that we're doing something different next month with Bray School Stories. We're going on location, and this is the first time we're going to try this. And we're going to be part of the Slate seminar, and it's going to be Saturday morning at 9 o'clock instead of a Monday evening at 6 p.m. But have no fear, we are going to be recording it. And so for those of you not really up for watching Bray School Stories on a Saturday morning, we will have it recorded and up on our YouTube site. But we've had some questions about the archaeological work that's being done at the original Bray School site here in Williamsburg. And so we are having representatives from the archaeological staff at Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, as well as William and Mary staff, as well as descendant community members who are going to participate in Bray School Stories and really talk a little bit about some of these archaeological discoveries. So I wanted to just kind of make sure we put that out there. The registration is going to look a little different. We're just kind of switching things up. We're just going to see what this looks like. But I just wanted to alert you that Bray School Stories next month is going to look a little different. And we hope that you'll still kind of join us. I'm going to stop sharing that. At that point, I wanted to make sure I got that in. I really do appreciate you all being here this evening and sticking with us. We have gone well over our time this evening, but I thought that the conversation was so rich and the information that was being shared was so important. And people seem to really still be wanting to hang out in conversation with this. So thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you so much to Graham, to Nicole, to Andrea, for everything that you brought to this group and this discussion this evening. I so appreciate all of you being
Thank
here
you.
and all of the work that you all are doing. It's so important, and please keep it up.
Yes,
Okay.
keep it up.
Thank you. And so everyone, I wish you a good night and pleasant dreams. And we hopefully will see all of you back here next month at Bray School Stories. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.